If I could have everybody go ahead and find their seats, we'll go ahead and begin this morning. Well, good morning. My name is Marcy King. I'm the Executive Director of the Owen County Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to the very first legislative breakfast of 2022. And I was telling everybody it wouldn't be a legislative breakfast if you didn't have to drive in the snow early in the morning. So thank you very much for being here this morning. Thank you for braving the roads to be here. I also want to thank all of you who are joining us on Facebook. This morning's breakfast is sponsored by the Bloomington Board of Realtors. We want to make sure and thank them. Without our sponsors, we would not be able to have all the events that we do every year at the Chamber, so I really appreciate that sponsorship. And all of our legislative breakfasts are hosted right here at the Owen Valley Christian Fellowship, so I'd like to thank them also for hosting us as well as helping us to be online. And then finally, we do have our coffee sponsor, which is Main Street Coffee, so make sure and grab yourself a cup of coffee and some donuts up there. Today, joining us, we have Representative Bob Heaton, all the way here at the end. We have Senator Eric Bassler here in the middle, and Senator Bray right here. And I want to thank all three of these gentlemen for being here and for being so active here in Owen County and for representing us so well. Thank you very much. Just a little housekeeping. If you are joining us online and you have a question, all you have to do is ask your question into the chat, and we have someone that is monitoring that, and we'll make sure to do our very best to get that question asked for you. And if you are here in the audience, if you'll just raise your hand and wait to be called on by our moderator, I will come and walk to you, and I will hold the mic in front of you for you to be able to ask your question. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and begin, but I would like to finally introduce our moderator for our legislative breakfast. This is his second year in doing this, and we truly appreciate you volunteering for this. Ladies and gentlemen, County Councilman Anton Neff.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us, and many thanks to everybody that's joining us online as well. So as Marcy mentioned, this is our legislative breakfast, the first of the season, the new season, and we have some familiar faces that are joining us. We actually are represented by 4 individuals at the State House here in Owen County, at least for now, until the lines are redrawn. We'll get to that in a moment. But I will expand just a little bit more as far as where these individuals are from. Rod Bray, our Senate Pro Tem, is a part of, very much a part of the leadership with the Senate. So we're lucky to have someone like him having part of his district here in Owen County. He represents District 37, which includes pretty much the kind of the northern half of Owen County. And when we talk a little bit about redistricting, he actually gained a little bit more of Owen County in that process. And that was at the expense of our other senator who represents the southern part of Owen County, District 39, and that's Eric Bassler, of course. And then we have 2 representatives, one that's with us, Bob Heaton, District 46, and he represents pretty much all of Owen County except the northern townships. And he will gain the rest of those townships after, yes, that'll make it a little simpler, right? So he will represent all of Owen County once the redistricting is in place. The other representative is Bo Baird, and he's from Putnam County, and he's attended before and is a very active legislator as well. Bob is a part of the leadership in the House, I believe still majority whip, is that correct? So again, Owen County is very fortunate to have such a good group of leaders that we can call on. Now, as with any event like this, we always ask folks to be very civil, and I think you all usually do a pretty good job. And a lot of familiar faces are out here in the audience this morning, so I don't think we'll have any problems with that. We're going to allow our legislators an opening statement to kind of introduce themselves perhaps and talk a little bit about the session. And then we would like to have as much time as possible for Q&A because that's one of the most valuable parts of this event. And so with that, Senator Bray, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, happy to, Anton. Thank you, and thanks for the introduction. And Marcy, thanks for yours as well. And just appreciate being able to be here again. And it is true. I think it seems like every time we have one of these, it's a challenging weather. So it wouldn't be right if we didn't have that. So glad you're all here. And for those of you that are on online as well, pleased to be with you all. I'll talk just a little bit about the redistricting, and just to simply say, I think Anton pointed it out exactly right, but pleased to have more of Owen County. My district did not change very much, but I've kind of replaced Greencastle, which I used to have. I'll still have the southern part of Putnam County, and now I get Spencer, and so further down south into Owen County, and frankly, very excited about that. This is a short legislative session. I'll talk a little bit about some of our priorities, but I won't try to talk very long so we can get to questions about things that are interesting to you folks or of concern to you folks. And short sessions always start very quickly. This is the perfect example of that. It started an absolute sprint, and so lots of things to talk about, and happy to do that. Some of the things that we started out as priority items were a couple of different things. Because the state's fiscal position is so strong right now, and in fact, when we have 12.5%, our surplus is more than 12.5% of our budget, then an automatic taxpayer refund kicks out. And that, in fact, is the case now. And what that means is we have a lot of money as surplus over and above what we need for the budget. And so that comes back to taxpayers. It actually comes back in two ways. One part, half of any refund that kicks in is a part that goes to our currently unfunded public employees retirement fund, which is a pension for teachers, et cetera, and public employees. And then the other half goes back to taxpayers. And so all told, $545 million will be used to pay down some of that unfunded obligation for our retirement pension. And another $545 million is going to go out to taxpayers. And what this Senate Bill 1 does is makes sure, it structures the language a little bit so it's ensured that it goes out this year. We want it to go out this year, not next year. And we're expanding it so that about 900,000 more people are going to get that. It's not going to be at a large number when you get it, but nevertheless, we're giving $545 million back to taxpayers across the state of Indiana, because Indiana is extremely fortunate right now and simply does not need it. So we're happy to be able to do that and make sure that it functions correctly. In addition, we have some changes in the school count. Normally on September 17th of a school year, the first semester of a school year, we count where all the kids are in every school, and then that's how we decide what school funding is for that part of the year. It was problematic this year because as school began, so many kids had been contact traced and were out, and by current state law, if that child is learning remotely at the time of the count, then they don't get the full amount. You don't get 100% of the funding, you get 85% of the funding. It just wasn't appropriate to do under these circumstances. It was never intended to be used that way, so we're making sure that those schools will get 100% of the funding for those students, even if they were contact traced and out at that point in time, by looking at the entire semester. And finally, taking a number of steps so that the governor's current emergency order can be set aside, and we don't have to be under that any longer. And that deals with making some changes in the law so that we can continue to function. There's some federal dollars that if we ended the emergency order right now, those dollars would end. We don't really want to stop those dollars from flowing into the state of Indiana, so we're making those changes, but we want to be able to put the governor in a spot where he's going to end the emergency order, and based on our conversations, he's very willing to do so. So those are some of our highlighted items. Lots of other things going on, but I'll stop there and let somebody else speak and introduce the legislation they're working on.
Very good. Thanks so much. I'm always impressed with whether it's a Speaker of a House or a President of a Senate that can get into such good detail. Two out of those three items are things that are kind of obviously numbers related and therefore budget related, and you can see where members on the Budget Committee or the Appropriations Committee can get into that detail, but boy, for Rod to be able to go into that much detail there was impressive. So my name's Eric Bassler, and I do represent Senate District 39, and Senator Bray's district and my district obviously butt up against each other, and kind of the dividing line has been Owen County. And the line is moving a bit south. Somewhat easily speaking, I've always thought my district ended on about Interstate 70 through Owen and Clay counties. And that's changing as my district moves a little bit further south. I pick up some voters in Knox County, and then I also don't have Clay County, won't be in my district anymore going forward, which, that's part of the process. It's interesting because you develop good relationships with people in all the counties where you're working, and so I'll still have part of Owen County, so I'll still be coming to these kind of events and continue to have good relationships with, at least I think I have good relationships with everybody here. But when you give up Clay County, you're going to kind of miss those people. You'll still run into them some, but that's part of the process. Every 10 years we go through and we redraw the districts. So I'll look forward to continuing to represent you in the Indiana Senate. I actually live in Davies County, so that's how far south the district goes, down into Martin, Davies, and Knox County, and then the area between. Working on, just briefly, I'm on a few different committees. One is called Rules Committee. Another is the Appropriations Committee, and that's the one that most heavily is involved with the budgeting process. And then I'm also on a subcommittee of appropriations, which has to do with the K-12 funding. Working on just a handful of bills. My background is in numbers. I'm a financial advisor, so my bills tend to be related to numbers. One has to do with funding for universities. Another one has to do with financial institutions. And then another has to do with what's called the State Board of Accounts, and that's the entity that does a lot of the auditing of local governments, auditing of state agencies, involved with that. And then I'm also seem to have, for good or for ill, gotten involved with what's called the DLGF bill, and that's the Department of Local Government Finance, and that really gets heavily involved in a lot of nitty-gritty things with respect to local government. So I'm going to be involved with that bill again this year. So those are the ones I'm working on, and happy that you're here. And we look forward to any questions that you have, or anybody who's watching on Facebook, any questions they might have. So I'll turn it over to my dear colleague, Bob Heaton.
Okay. Thanks, Senators. I appreciate that. Again, good to be here, and I appreciate the sponsors. And gosh, hard to believe. I think we were just here about, 7 months ago? I mean, it's been a year, huh? But it's gone by quick. But it is always good to be here. And, we look at this short session, and if you think about it, people ask me, well, short session, long session, what's the difference, and what's the length of time? When you think about a short session, we're basically looking at being up there at the State House about 29 or 30 days, as far as in session and in committees and so forth. But it does go by pretty quick. We'll be up there another 2 weeks, then we take a little bit of a break. I think the afternoon of February 1st, which is a Tuesday, then we come back on that Monday, the 7th of February, and then at that time we receive the bills from the Senate, and they receive our bills. It's just like what Senator Bassler said about his bill that deals with local government. Dan Leonard deals with that over in our House, and he presented that in Ways and Means. It was House Bill 1260 the other day, and starts out, maybe 39 pages, but it may end up being about a lot more than that. But there's a lot of good in it, and I know I got a call yesterday from a guy from Columbus, Indiana, about there's a section in that bill he didn't really care for. He's I think county assessor or in that type of field. But anyway, again, it's a process that we go through in both committees, and then at the end there's conference committees, and then, as I tell people, behind closed doors they work things out, more or less. But so anyway, we've got in the House, we're dealing with like Senator Bray mentioned, as far as I think their Senate Bill 1 is our House Bill 1002 that deals with tax cuts and business personal property taxes and a number of different things. But when we look at our tax cuts in our particular bill, we're looking at about $1.3 billion given back to the taxpayers over the next few years. And right now, I think the rate is 3.23%. Currently, our state income tax rate. Under Governor Pence, we did have it at 3.42%, and he wanted to lower that, and they settled on 3.23%. So the goal is to get that down to about 3% in the coming years. And so some states don't even have an income tax, but they may have other taxes over here that they they have to offset that tax revenue, but every state's different. But it's, again, it's good to be here. I appreciate the dialogue that we have down here. Yesterday I was in Bloomington for a legislative luncheon that we have every year. And, you know, it seems like, and last Saturday I was in Terre Haute. We had they call it Cracker Barrel session. It's a like town hall or a get-together like this. And it seems like sometimes, whether it's in Terre Haute or Bloomington, we'll get asked certain questions that we may not get asked down here. You know, I see Bruce here with, you know, has always, and Marcy talking about the water situation here, and we have an issue, big issue down here about the water. And, you know, some of my colleagues throughout the state, they just shake their heads, says, Bob, what are you talking about? You know, they've got water and they got this and that, but everybody's different, and that's why we have 100 state reps and 50 senators, and in representing the people, and we do all we can. And as I'm also on Ways and Means, I have been for a few years now, and we hear the needs of a lot of people out there, and I usually remind them, well, come at us with just one handout instead of two, but everybody's got a lot of issues to deal with, and we appreciate that very much. So again, thanks for being here, and look forward to the dialogue that we're going to have this morning. Thanks.
So as we go into our Q&A session, one thing that might be a valuable resource if you have a smartphone is going to the legislature's website, where you can access the bills on your phone. And sometimes folks will mention bill numbers, and I don't think they've memorized all of those numbers quite yet. But if you happen to have a phone and a specific bill, you know, look that up, pull that up. There should be a description there, and it also tells you what the status is of the bill. Another thing that's been interesting this session is that the way the bills have been processed have been more, instead of batches typically coming out of committees, it seems like if the bill's done and it's good and it's passed out, it moves on. It seems like a little different pace this year, and it's different to follow. So there are some bills that have already passed out of the House or the Senate, and they're ready to go to the other side of the aisle there, and it's just a little different trying to track those things. So let's open it up for some Q&A. Who would like to be first this morning with their question? Don't be bashful.
I do it someplace.
All right, Bruce, first question.
Hear you on the
Okay.
online.
Just a quick thing. Do you know what this is? Looks like a piece of art. I think it's important to make a point here. Daryl knows where I'm going with this. That is a water jug. It's 3,000 years old. And if you can remember your history, that's how people got water. And can you imagine maybe having to have a couple donkeys carry water? Well, let me give you an updated version of that. And that's exactly what goes on today. And I'll give you the one that really tears my heart out. Here's the one that shows you got a line of 3 vehicles with grandkids running around, helping grandparents get water. My point with that is, getting back to what Bob said, I have been many different places, and people, and I was in a meeting in Terre Haute this week, and water issue came up. They had no clue. They think these people doing this are doing it for their cattle, their livestock. They're not. So when I think about people in Monroe and Owen counties and Clay counties who have needs for rural water, it's significantly important. So what we need with that, think about the numbers, guys, I like to hear that, is as you're looking from a budget perspective this year to budget $500 million for rural infrastructure. I think it is so critically important. Sometimes it takes a picture to really understand that. When you have people that are trying to get water that really can't, you turn it on and they can't even turn it on, but they're hauling it. I had a staff person who had to haul water in the winter. Think about getting your water today. Today, as we're sitting here, you have to have it in a truck or you have it on a trailer. It's not one or two people. We're talking about a lot of people that have to haul water rurally. So it's a passion that I have, and he knows what I'm talking about as well. It's a serious need. So think in terms of budgeting this year, if you can add a lot of money that goes specifically to rural water. The other is you have other rural issues, whether it's rural broadband, which you've heard a lot about that, but you haven't heard a lot about rural water. So it's just another passion of mine. So think about how you budget all those dollars. Thank you.
All righty, do we have our second question for this morning? Yes, over here. And Marcy will bring the microphone to you there.
My name is Aiden Robertson. First, I want to thank each and every one of you to coming and listening to our concerns. We are transplants from Illinois, and we don't have anything like this in Illinois where we can actually talk with our legislators. I'm asking for your votes for House Bill 1372. I do not have an iPhone, so I can't read it directly, but the sponsor is Representative Kurt Nisley, and the co-author is Representative John Jacob. It has been referred to the Committee on Public Health. And basically what this bill does, it prohibits the Medical Licensing Board of Indiana, the Indiana State Board of Nursing, the Board of Pharmacy in Indiana, so they cannot deny, revoke, suspend, or take disciplinary action against physicians, nurses, or pharmacists who issue ivermectin to people. I realize this is an issue for some people. I myself take ivermectin with a prescription. I could not find a local doctor who would give that to me for my long haulers, which, if you don't know what that is, you have COVID and then you keep having COVID in one form or another. Mine was shallow breathing that months after I had COVID, I had trouble just going about activities of daily living. And I wasn't real happy about that because I could breathe before I had COVID. And I found a doctor online. There are quite a few doctors who will help people in my position. I had previously, the month before, been hospitalized, I believe because of this condition, and he was able to prescribe to me ivermectin and 2 steroids to help with my breathing. That was able to alleviate a lot of my problems. I could not get the ivermectin at that time in this state. I had to go out of state, and he had a list. Right now, there are about 500 physicians throughout the United States who have given over 90,000 prescriptions for ivermectin for people like me and people who want to prevent getting COVID. And part of the reason that doctors in this state and in other states will not do this is they are being threatened with their license. So this would help in that situation. Thank you.
All right, we do have an online question we'll jump into. This is from Thomas Abril. Why is so much time wasted on gun permit elimination? Fairly simple question. Does anyone want to jump in on that?
Well, I think that dealt with House Bill 1077. I think Ben Smaltz, the author of the bill, spends a lot of time on it. I don't know who all else does. It passed out of the House a year ago, and it passed out of the House just recently, as in 3 days ago, I think it was. But anyway, it was a bipartisan vote, and the intent there is basically the Constitution says, you know, we have the the right to bear arms and with the Second Amendment and so forth. But it's just, so the question is, why is it that we have to pay for that license if the Constitution says we can bear arms? So I got, I had to get my fingerprints a couple years ago, and it cost $12.95, and that's all it cost me to get my permit. And but at one time, the Sheriff's Association and the Police Alliance were against this because they wouldn't get those funds for training and so forth. Well, we put that in the bill a couple years ago, the budget bill, to offset that. So right now, I think the sheriffs, according to Ben Smoltz, the author of that bill, the Sheriff's Association as well as the Police Alliance, they didn't comment one way or the other whether they are for or against it. And so now it's going to go over to the Senate and see, if they proceed with that bill or not. But anyway, it's something that I think it was. I think there was 3 Republicans that voted against that, and but one Democrat voted for it. Dr. Fleming from Jeffersonville, she voted for it like she did last year. So we'll see what happens in the Senate and take it from there, basically.
Just a real quick assessment, I suppose. It certainly gets a lot of talk. We haven't spent a lot of time on it in the Senate yet, although as it comes over, we very well may spend some. Indiana is a very Second Amendment friendly state. At this point, we have, as Representative Heaton already referenced, you can get a license to carry a handgun. I think it's a 4-year license, or there's a lifetime license, both of which are free. And as Representative Heaton said, we've kind of backfilled those training dollars, because there used to be a fee for getting your license, and those dollars would go to local law enforcement across the state, and they could use that to train their officers. Really important dollars, of course, that we didn't want them to go without. And so, but now you can get that for free, and the only inconvenience is going out to get your fingerprints. But nevertheless, there's a good-sized group of folks around the state of Indiana that feel like that's still an infringement, and you ought to be able to carry a license without having to. You ought to be able to carry a handgun without having to have a license at all. And the flip side of that is there are some concerns, because some law enforcement has some concerns about this, because the main issue, I suppose, is this on the other side. I'm just trying to kind of color the issue for you. If you are a law enforcement officer and you pull somebody over late on a Friday night and they have a handgun in the passenger seat, right now you know whether or not they're allowed to have that handgun, because you can see very quickly from your computer screen in your car whether or not they have the permit to carry a handgun. If there is no license, then they can no longer figure that out because they can't tell if you're allowed to have it or not. And you're allowed to have a handgun, you're allowed to carry a handgun, or you would be allowed to get a license. Everyone would be allowed to get a license except a handful of people that have felony convictions and things of that nature. And there's a few other folks that would be roped into that as well that have some mental health issues, but largely everyone else would be able to carry a handgun because they could get that license. But if you don't have that license, law enforcement can't tell at that point in time, and so that is the concern that they have. So that's what the issue is, and as it comes over to the Senate, that's what we'll debate as well. That bill hasn't landed there yet. I think it's about to.
All right. Do we have another question from the audience? Joe.
How is the Senate leading on the passage of that bill? Or is it a toss-up?
I think my gut instinct is it will have a more challenging time in the Senate than it did in the House. And it was similar either last year or 2 years ago, where it just didn't get through the House. It seems as though it might get a hearing, but not sure if it'll get a vote. And if it gets a vote, we'll have to wait and see how it passes out. And part of that has to do with what the final bill looks like. It's hard to commit to say, yes, I'm definitely going to vote for a bill, or I'm definitely going to vote against a bill until you really see the final product. But my gut instinct is it's going to have a little bit of an uphill battle in the Senate side.
All right. In the back, Jeff. Marcy will bring that to you.
Good morning, Jeff Marks, Morgan Township. I'm going to start this morning. I was going to start this morning with a rant, but I'll stop that, okay? As you may know, Owen County is faced with the challenge with respect to the potential building of a new jail, okay? We raised our local income tax last year. It was a subject of considerable discussion and within the county. Part of that was based on the fact that level 6 felons were required to be housed in the Owen County Jail, and that looked like a growing and basically unending unfunded mandate for Owen County. Okay, I want to compliment the House of Representatives on their support of HB 1004. Which changes the way in which the government will deal with level 6 felons. The judges will have the opportunity to sentence those level 6 felons to the Department of Corrections, which would be the state prisons. And I want to compliment, this is the only time, Bob, but I'm going to compliment Representative Heaton on the fact that you are a co-author of that bill. So thank you, sir. That's all I got, unless you want to talk about it. 1004.
Well, and I'm going to jump in real quick, being a county guy. And
I just want to say,
we definitely
Jeff,
support
thank you for that comment.
Yeah, that is very helpful to counties to give that discretion to our judges determining placement, because not only is it an issue in cost locally, but it's also the services that those inmates have access to. And the state system is so much more robust and broader in their facilities to be able to provide things like mental health and addictions treatment, those kind of things to hopefully prevent the individual from returning into the system. So.
Well, right, and Jeff, I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, it's an issue. It's a big issue. I know, in Vigo County, I don't know if it's $68 million, jail that they just now complete or getting ready to anyway. But it's and it's just not here. It's everywhere, of that issue and so forth. But so it's a lot of work that has been done in the last several years, if you will, that dealing with some of these things. But it's a big problem, and it may not go away either. So.
All right, we do have an online question, and Marcy has that in front of her. She'll ask that.
This question is from Jennifer Cunningham. It was mentioned earlier about schools receiving money based on school attendance. Do you know approximately how much of the state, how much of the state funding given to Indiana schools will go to Spencer Elementary School or Owen County schools as a whole? Or does the money go to Owen County School Corporation as a whole?
I can jump on that if you'd like for me to. Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, but can you just ask that one more time, at least the last part of it?
Do you know approximately how much of the state funding given to Indiana schools will go to Spencer Elementary School or Owen County schools as a whole? Or does the money go to Owen County School Corporation as a whole?
Yep, good question. I don't know off the top of my head specifically how much will go to Owen County schools. I can sure get that. But starting out the big picture, then we'll drill down a little bit. From the big picture perspective, a little bit over 50% of the state budget is spent on K-12 education, and then about 13% is spent on higher education. So not quite 2/3 of our whole budget goes towards some area of education. What we do is we do a per child funding. It can get slightly more complicated because there is so much per child, but then there's additional dollars that would go toward what are called complex children. So children that are either in foster care or they're receiving SNAP or TANF benefits. Then that school corporation would get additional funding per child. And it does go to the school corporation, and then ultimately the local school corporation would be the one to determine how those dollars are allocated. From a local school corporation perspective, the state is a significant funding for the overall operations. And then the next most significant funding dollars would come from property taxes. If you look at your property tax bill, you'll see on there how much goes to your local school corporation. And I don't have the information with me exactly what goes to Owen County schools, and I don't have that off the top of my head, but I'd sure be happy to get that in detail if you'd like to, how much goes from the state to Owen County School Corporation. And back to the exact question, it would then again be the local school corporation that would determine, how much is spent on, this elementary school versus that elementary school versus a middle school or junior high or high school or what have you. The local school corporation determines how those dollars are then allocated. But thank you for asking.
All right, and then we have a question back center. Derek?
Good morning. My name is Derek Morgan. I am on the Spencer Owen Community School Corporation School Board. Great segue. You can kind of answer the question. Don't have those numbers in front of me. Talk to our superintendent. And so I've talked to many of you in the past years. My day job is that I work for the Jobs for America's Graduates program. And so I thank you guys for continuing to support that in that program. I think we're going to need, the JAG program is going to need more funding in the years to come. I think our workforce development issues are going to increase some of the learning loss issues that we're going to face in education. Students who are not going to graduate on time. We're going to need more programs and more, there's going to be a greater need for that going forward. So thank you for your support for that. But I come here today as an educator and someone in education to speak out against House Bill 1182. That is the partisan school board race bill that made it to the Elections and Apportionments Committee this past week in the House. There are no fewer than 6 bills in the House that deal with this issue and 2 in the Senate. I don't know that the Senate bills have gained any traction yet or made it to committee yet. But I speak out against partisan school boards in general because I think we'd all agree that we want politics, especially partisan politics, taken out of our classrooms. That's not the place for it. And if we have lots of bills that are aiming to do that, and on the face of that, I don't disagree with that goal. But we have legislation trying to insert partisanship into the school system at the top. I look back at the decisions that the board has made in the past year, and looked at all the agendas, and most of the issues that we deal with on a monthly or bi-monthly basis are issues of hiring people, of approving grants, approving building projects, and financial decisions, setting goals for the corporation. But one of the biggest things that we did in the past year was we hired a superintendent. Our superintendent left, and our whole month of June was spent doing interviews. Very long process of finding the right candidate for that position. And partisanship within the school board, if we had school board members there acting partisanly, that process could have a really large effect on the education that comes down through the system. So if we had a partisan board, a hyper-partisan board that wanted to hire a specific partisan superintendent, who then in turn wanted to hire partisan administrators and teachers, that impacts the education that our children receive. And the issues that, we do have issues that face school board elections. That is not a non-problem. There are problems, but I think our biggest problem is the lack of interest in those elections. And I don't know that the proposed legislation actually fixes the problems that we face on the grounds when it comes to school board elections. At best, the proposed legislation, I believe, would leave us with not much change. It wouldn't fix the problems that we actually have as far as people being interested. There's about a 30% drop-off of people voting in school board elections. 30 to 40, depending on where you go, from the top of the ballot down to the bottom. I don't know that partisan school boards actually fix that problem. At worst, it invites hyperpartisan politics into our school corporations. And I don't think that that's a situation where our children end up winning, that our children get the best education if that is part of our process. I actually went up to testify against that bill at the Elections and Apportionments Committee on Tuesday. 20 people showed up to speak against that bill. Nobody showed up to speak for it. I would encourage you to, if it does come out of committee, to vote against that measure. I don't know that it's something that we need. It doesn't fix our problems. And so my question to each of you is, do you support the switch to partisan school board elections? And if so, what have you done to come to that conclusion? What research, what conversations have you had to come to that conclusion?
I'd be happy to address that one, and my colleagues can obviously chime in. Again, until I see a final product, it's hard to say whether I'd vote yes or no. However, generally speaking, I guess my first thought is, what problem are we trying to solve, and would this solve the problem? I haven't had a lot of people come to me, and whether it's school administrators, school teachers, parents, school board members. I really haven't had anybody come to me and say that we'd like to start having partisan school board elections. So I guess I'm not aware that there's a significant problem when it comes to partisan or nonpartisan elections. It gives me pause, though, because as you were asking that question, I was thinking of one particular school board member that I know, and this person is probably the most, I guess, with this specific school board that I'm thinking about, is probably the most dedicated, or one of the most dedicated school board members. The person works really hard and tries to understand the issues, how to educate children, funding mechanisms, how best to allocate the dollars. And if it went to partisan elections, my gut instinct is he wouldn't get elected. He's a Democrat in a really Republican area, and I think that he would find it challenging to get elected if we went to partisan. I think that could be a loss to that school board, a loss of someone who's really passionate, really cares, and really digs in. And he's not the kind of person that just shows up on the day of the school board meeting without having looked at the material or reviewed anything. He puts a lot of time in, and boy, you'd sure hate to think that we're going to be eliminating members like that. Just based upon a political party affiliation. So my inclination would be, boy, I'm not inclined to get behind something like that. I know that there's some discussion. A couple of my colleagues in the Senate, I believe, have authored a bill that is something that I would possibly be able to get behind if I had to get behind something, and that has to do with, it would allow the local school boards to decide whether they wanted to have partisan races or not. Now, the view from which I look at things as a state senator, as your state senator, is I have a tendency to look at them from as local level as possible, because I used to be on the city council, and there were times where I was frustrated that the state was doing X, Y, or Z that had a significant impact on local government. And so that's something that I could probably support if it was left up to the locals. Because again, I think the more local a decision, the better. Kind of my outlook on how decisions should be made is first the individual, then the family, then the community, whether it's through a town council, a city council, a school board, then the county council. Then if that can't solve the problem, then we can go to the state or federal level. But I prefer decisions to be made as local as possible, because who's best to make those decisions other than the local people that are running the county or running the school board or the city council or what have you. So it gives me great pause. I know that I guess I understand it's on the news these days that they need to come into play, and we need to do this and that, but I'm not inclined to allow our state agenda to be dictated by somebody's head who's exploding on some TV program or some internet web page or something. So my inclination would be, what are we trying to solve, and does this really solve it? I would agree that it would be nice to try to get more people to run for really all offices, federal on down to the local dog catcher. The more people we have running for office, the better it is for our society. And I don't see where this would necessarily lead to more people running. So I guess I'm not inclined. My first thought is, I don't know what we're trying to do with that. So, well, sorry about that long answer.
Problem that has come up is that switching to partisan school board elections would eliminate, due to the Hatch Act, any federal employees. So down in
It's interesting.
a large chunk of your district, Crane employees,
Yeah.
if anybody was a federal employee with Crane, they would be ineligible to serve on their school board. And in certain areas of the state, that eliminates a lot of potential, very civically minded people from that pool of candidates.
Sure, I hadn't thought about that unintended consequence, and that's one thing that's always a struggle when you think about legislations or bills. What are the unintended consequences of Bill X, Y, or Z? And I had not thought about that, but I could see where that would have a negative impact on the people that are even or that are able to run due to the Hatch Act. So that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Well, Derek, thanks for getting up there and being in part of the process. I think Representative J.D. Prescott, that was his bill, wasn't it? And it did not go to a vote. I think possibly this week it might, but I don't know yet. Last Saturday in Terre Haute, this came up, and Senator Ford was there, and he said he went to the coffee shop earlier that morning, and 4 people came up to him and said, "Hey, that's important to us." 3 of the 4 said, "I want you to vote yes." 1 person says, "John, you need to vote no." So it's complicated. It's all over there. I don't know about the 3 counties that of the 4 counties, 3 of them I don't live in, but in Vigo County, I do know the school board members and if they're Democrat or Republican, because I really get engaged. 80–90% of the people probably don't, So in a way, even though it's nonpartisan, well, yes, it really is, if you really get to know them and study and talk to the individuals at the coffee shop or wherever to find out their viewpoints on education or whatever it may be. And so it's not easy. It's on my survey. Haven't got all the results back from my survey, but I wanted to put it out there to find out what the people, what their thoughts are on that. So I'm kind of curious what that's going to be. But it's not easy, I think this transpired months ago, maybe in other states and that type of thing. And I think, when you look at critical race theory and so forth, that type of thing, it seemed like there was up in Noblesville, Fishers, there was a lot of protests and rallies and issues pertaining to that and so forth. And so, but it's a concern. I think in some cases, if people don't like this school district or school corporation, guess what? They may move over here to another county or another school corporation to educate their kids or homeschool or whatever that may be. So it's not an easy thing, but I appreciate the comments and the passion that you have, Derek, to get up there and be a part of the process and voice your opinion on that. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks. I'll weigh in just real quickly as well. And as Representative Heaton said, we think sometimes it's difficult being in the Senate or the House. Being on a school board, I think, might be doubly so on some days. I have no doubt about that. No doubt about that. There's another practical challenge to it as well. And I hadn't thought about the Hatch Act piece either, frankly. So I'm glad you brought that up.
We have a board member who's a county employee who would be ineligible to concurrently hold office.
That's right. And I truly hadn't considered that piece of it, so I'm glad you brought it up. But, if you have these jobs, as you very well know, aren't highly paid, And so, but suddenly you're looking at running an election in May and then in November as well. And so that's another challenge there. And just the cost of the election, first of all, of a second election. And then the challenge of the candidate trying to run in 2 elections. And we don't really want to be in a position where we make it harder for people who are, have busy lives and careers anyway to run for those offices. So that's another challenge we need to consider. I think that over the last 18 months or 2 years, there's been some real challenges all across the state, but in schools in particular. And I think that's some of where this is coming from. And there's some legitimate points to be made for advocating for that. I think by and large, the things that will fix this, even if we didn't go with partisan school boards, is making sure that there is transparency in the school boards and their decisions and their meetings. Largely there is, but maybe there's some things that can be done to help that, and engagement of parents across the school district. And transparency and engagement really fix an awful lot of things, and that's probably what we need to try and focus on.
I'd say that is something that our board has had conversations about, is how do we provide greater transparency? And I think that the origin of that issue comes from when before I was on the board, I attended meetings regularly. As our reporter can attest to, I was the only member of the public present for a majority of the meetings. People weren't paying attention to school board meetings, and now all of a sudden they are. And so I've had conversations with a lot of folks that have said, well, you need greater transparency, and I agree with that. But our starting point was that very few people were paying attention to what was happening, and now we hit the accelerator and ended up going 120 miles an hour. And so I think those conversations, and board members from around the state that I've talked to and that I know are having those conversations about, okay, yeah, we gladly provide transparency. You mentioned the CRT issue. Our curriculum director has brought in many people to say, hey, look at our curriculum. We invite you to pick something out of the curriculum that you have an issue with. Let's talk about it. And those things are happening. And so I don't know that we need a legislative fix to problems that are happening on the ground level at the local level. And I worry that the unintended consequences would be worse than letting the problem work itself out at the local level. So.
Okay, one final question, and then we're going to switch subjects.
Yeah, just one final comment, and what Senator Bray was talking about kind of brought something to my mind. And in your comments about transparency, I mean, obviously we want to promote more openness instead of less. And so one thing that has come about over the last, let's say, year or so that gives me at least a degree of concern, maybe even a high degree of concern, and that is that some school boards have gone to prohibiting public comments at school boards. And boy, that makes me really uncomfortable. I know right now that we do not require public input at school board meetings or town councils or city councils or county councilors or county commissioners or what have you. But my thought is, if you want to get on a radar screen, start prohibiting it. And that's gotten on the radar screen. And so I think that we should at least think about whether we should require that for school boards, because boy, that's if county council starts shutting it off, you bet. I know, for example, at the Senate, I realize a citizen can't come into the Senate floor and offer comments, but boy, they sure can through the committee process. And if the Senate or the House were all of a sudden going to say no citizens can come testify before our committees, boy, that would send me from whatever 0 to 100 or 0 to 10 or whatever really quickly, because boy, that's such an important feedback loop, is to have those public comments at these various levels. And so I know there's some discussion, and I know this doesn't go to your exact question, but I know there's some discussion where we would require for public testimony to be given at those kind of meetings. Now, we would allow, the discussion is the locals could have some parameters. You know, you can't get there and sit there and talk for 30 minutes or something. Maybe you got 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 2 minutes or what have you. That's just something that I've noticed lately that does give me concern. I mean, hopefully you have public testimony at your school meetings, and I appreciate that.
All right, and let's move on to another subject. Do we have one more question in person from someone that has not asked one yet? All right, we do have an online question that Marcy has. Go ahead.
Okay, this question is from Shauna Gerges with IU Health South Central Region that serves Owen County. And concern to HB 1001, it deals with vaccines and the ability of businesses to require vaccines of their employees. What is your stance on this issue?
So this is a House bill. Bob, if you want to go first, or I'm happy to.
Well, yeah, that is, the author of the bill is Matt Lehman, 1001, and it went through committee, it passed, I don't know what the numbers was recently, but it's going to go to the floor with amendments and so forth. But it's, we've had good discussion in caucus about this particular bill, and I think what we saw with the Supreme Court of the United States the other day, this makes this bill that much more important. And so it's kind of, I don't know what the end result's going to be, but you know, I just personally, I got the 2 shots, Pfizer shots back in March, and my friend encouraged me to do it. And so I did it, and he said, oh, it's just 6 minutes up the road at IU Health, north of the State House. And so I did it. And 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, I got my booster. But nobody's told Bob Heaton, here's what, by golly, you got to do. And but I did it for myself. And knock on wood, I haven't got COVID, thank goodness. A lot of my friends and colleagues have. I've got a 12-year-old grandson that's in quarantine now because one of his classmates got COVID. But anyway, and I carry my Tony Fauci card here that shows my vaccinations and so forth. But it's just, again, it is complicated too, you know. And you talk about the testing and so forth, but I got back in September, I think it was Wednesday, September the 8th, matter of fact, I got home from all places, Purdue University, I was up there, and I didn't feel all that good that night, and I ached all over for 2.5 days. I got tested the next day in Terre Haute, first time I got tested for COVID, and it was negative, and but I woke up Saturday morning and I felt great. You know, I don't know. I don't know if that was something that went through there. If that was the Omicron before it became Omicron, I don't know. But I got over it. And but again, it's complicated and it's not easy. We'll see how that goes this next week and a half, and take it from there. But there's more discussion. There'll be amendments this coming week to be put on there and so forth, but we'll check it out. And I don't know if the Senate has something over there, if they're dealing with that, with the companion bill.
So we really don't have anything moving at this point that deals specifically with that. It is a complex issue. I think you find a lot of employers haven't moved toward mandating because simply one of the biggest challenges the state of Indiana has right now is workforce. Everybody's trying to get employees, and if they have those employees, they are desperately trying to keep those employees. So that keeps a lot of employers from saying, okay, we're going to mandate this, because there are some people that just don't feel comfortable getting the vaccination, which is their decision to be able to make. When it comes to, and so I don't think you're going to see the General Assembly say employers, you cannot mandate a vaccine. There's a right of an employer to do what's going to make decisions on in its workplace. But the conversation really seems to be around this. if they are going to say or encourage their employees to get a vaccination, there needs to be very clearly delineated exceptions to that, meaning I have a medical exemption, I shouldn't get my vaccine, my doctor tells me that. That ought to be honored. I think that's an easy one for me. Another kind of long-standing exemption to a vaccination can be a religious exemption, and what I hear some things across the state that frankly are troubling to me. When a big corporation comes in and says, yeah, we looked at your request for religious exemption and we don't think it's sincere. You know, that rubs people the wrong way, and the people that get a hold of me say they have a problem with that. So figuring out exactly what that religious exemption is and how someone can exercise it is kind of what this language seems to be about. Very tricky to try and thread the needle here without saying you cannot mandate, but we need to honor these exemptions, and that's where the debate is. And the House is having that right now, and when it comes over to the Senate, we'll take an extremely close look at that.
All right, and I have a county question that I'm going to interject here on House Bill 1002. And Bob, you had mentioned this earlier. There's a number of tax provisions in that relating to business personal property. And there's a lot of good things with helping our local business owners and making sure that they have lesser cost, they can provide services and goods. The concern with county government has to do with the revenue, as you can imagine. And I know that there is a lot of discussion about making sure that local units of government do not have a negative hit from that in some fashion, whatever mechanism that may be. Can any of you comment on that? Because that is an important thing for not only counties, but it's for schools, cities and towns. We don't want to lose revenue. We don't want tax caps to cut off revenue completely. And we also want to make sure that any loss of revenue through that source or that part of property tax doesn't get shifted to other taxpayers like homeowners, farmers, who would bear the cost of the lost revenue. So how do you, what are some comments you can throw in on that?
Good point, Anton. And I thought, when were you going to talk about this? Now you finally did. Again, we're talking about this just recently in Ways and Means. You know, business personal property tax, I think there's 11 states that do not have it. Illinois doesn't have it. Ohio doesn't. Michigan is phasing it out in the next year and a half. Kentucky has business personal property tax, but when we talk about that floor, we're at 30%. Kentucky is at 10%. And so I know the Indiana Chamber is on board to get rid of business personal property tax, at least the 30% floor. You know, we heard some concerns from cities and towns the other day about it. Again, we're trying to work out the details and so forth on that. So we're hearing the locals express their viewpoints on that. But it's some of my notes here that deals with that. But it's just kind of, we're looking at it, and I think it's going to be tweaked a lot in the next month and a half.
Yeah, and I think one of the concepts that has been discussed is that if the state is in control of credits to offset that cost. So if you still leave the mechanism in place, but then on the back end, you're giving business owners the ability to get it back, but that would be through more of a state-controlled mechanism. Yeah, that would help the locals because it wouldn't really impact them negatively, but it puts the state in the driver's seat in terms of managing that aspect.
Exactly, and the tax credits, we've talked about that, and I think we're okay with it. I'm not sure if Senator Mishler is okay with tax credits over there in the Senate, but anyway, again, try to get all parties involved and try to work out the details in a few weeks.
All right, so back to our audience. Jeff had his hand up earlier as a second question, so we're going to go to him next.
Thanks. Jeff Marks, Morgan Township again. So now for the rant, but I'll make it short. From my perspective, the Indiana Division of Forestry has broken the trust that these people in the state of Indiana have put in it with its recent Salamone sale It sold the wood for 6 cents a board foot, which is 20% of market price. I think the Indiana Division of Forestry has a fiduciary responsibility to the citizens of Indiana to raise as much money as they can when they have to make these sales. I urge you to support HB 1253, talking about not getting hearings. We've not had many hearings on the 10% set aside. We had one in the Senate about 6 years ago, and we're not getting one now. So yes, I think it needs a hearing. You all need to be aware of the fact that next year in budget year, I will be arguing for the removal of the State Forest Fund as a manner of funding for the Indiana Division of Forestry. I think it leads to bad behavior on the part of the Division of Forestry. Thank you very much. Any comments that you might have?
Jeff, do you know the process in which they did that sale? I mean, just to say that it's 20% of the market price is, I'm not disputing that. I'm just, how do they do that? Was it not done by, you know?
Single bidder, they had a minimum bid, which would have been, in my view, $12,000 for 163,000 board feet if they actually had a minimum bid. I would love somebody to ask the question to see the paperwork, but that's another story. Okay, they had a minimum bid, there was a single bidder. I can point out the fact that in 4 of the cases where there was less than optimal bidding, there was only one bidder. There's something wrong with the bid process in the Division of Forestry.
Yeah, so was it just an RFP or was it an auction or?
It was a 30-day auction.
And just had one bidder?
They had one bid, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, just a brief comment. I'm familiar with what Jeff is talking about, and it was an unusually low price. It seemed like when you compare it to, I'm not even sure what terms to use here, but when it comes to other things over the last couple of years when trees were sold through the state forest, it seemed like it was an unusually low price compared to what the state has gotten in the past. And Jeff mentions one mechanism that we have in the state budget that I've never quite understood nor particularly cared for, and that is that the DNR, and maybe more specifically, what's the subdivision? Division of Forestry. The more trees they sell, the more money they get into their budget, and that's to me a strange mechanism, because if you're going to pay somebody for something, you're going to get more of it, aren't you? So even if it makes sense to cut down X number of trees every year from every state forest, I wonder if we're getting something above X just because there's a financial incentive in place to sell more trees. And I've had some talks with my colleagues about that, and I'll continue to talk with them about that. My preference would be, let's look at the last, 2 budgets or 5 budgets or 3 budgets and see what the average funding they've received from through that mechanism, and let's put that in a line item, and then have any trees that are sold go back to the general fund. So it's not a conflict of interest like exists right now. That's always concerned me. So I appreciate you bringing that to everybody's attention.
All right, and we do have some time for more questions. So Bruce, you have another question for us?
Comment, frankly.
Okay.
I want to follow up with your question and thinking in terms of what I had shared earlier about the rural water. But when you're looking at budgets, you represent rural areas as well as the cities and towns. Please always keep in mind the rural folks really don't have the funds generally to accomplish goals that we really need. So thinking in terms of budgets, keep the rural folks in mind. I use that term folks because we all care about each other. And, but just do that if you don't mind, whether it's health issues, it's internet, broadband, it's water, it's a number of other issues. And I think about what Anton goes through every year with budgeting and those in county council. Funds that you could actually allocate in a budget that would be specifically to the rural environment. So just a comment.
I think that's a very good point. It's more difficult for rural Indiana to have the funds to do various things. And you may recall, we did this recently with, I believe it was a community crossings grant, I think it is, where I think it was counties under 50,000 and then towns under 10,000, or maybe it's towns under 20,000, did not have to put as many matching dollars in as, say, Evansville or Bloomington or Terre Haute or Indianapolis. And that was a way that the legislature thought that, I think they understand that it is more difficult from a rural perspective to have those dollars to do that. And I think that I can speak for the three of us to say, boy, we'd sure like to see other things like that in the future, because it is hard for rural Indiana to come up with the money to do, whether it's the water infrastructure, the road infrastructure, what have you. And so we'll continue to try to push for those kind of funding mechanisms in the future, no doubt about that.
Yeah, I know we talked about it earlier, but on the water issue, but there in Bloomington yesterday, I sat next to can't think of Pepper's last name, but she's with AT&T, but she brought this up about the water issue in Owen County. I said, yeah, we've got that, and she wasn't aware of it at all. I think she's from the southern part of the state, but word's getting out, Bruce. I mean, we haven't seen the numbers yet, and we've got issues at the local level too, and trying to work things out and the matching and so forth. But I know it's on our radar. I know Rod and I think Eric about 3 years ago, we met with the people at the water company here locally and had that discussion. But and yesterday down in Bloomington, we talked about housing and affordable housing and so forth. And I know here in just a few feet over here, we're going to put in a subdivision. I think we're fine here when it comes to water at this area, but when you look at further to the north part of the county, it's an issue, big time. And other parts, southwest of Spencer and so forth. But anyway, appreciate the passion and the comment.
Yeah, and community crossings, which you mentioned, has been a godsend for us. We've received millions of dollars over the last several years, which would all go into roads. The MVH issue is still there that we talked about previous years. The split within our MVH fund and what the funds can be used for is still very hampering for local units that are smaller, like our county, in trying to just operate normally. So all extra money or grant money aside, just the operational ability that we have can be hamstringed a bit because of the 50% limitation on how certain MVH funds can be spent. So something to think about for perhaps next year with the budget and getting that cleaned up for counties, and we appreciate that. Do we have another online question? Marcy's going to ask this one.
Okay, this comes from Marianne Ruger. It's related to the school board question. Are there transparency requirements for charter schools being added to the bill that requires school districts to give referendum property tax funds to charter schools?
Not that I know of. So the question was, are there requirements to give money to charter schools?
Are there transparency requirements for charter schools being added to the bill that requires school districts to give referendum property tax funds to charter schools?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't know if these gentlemen would know off the top of their head, but I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. Sorry about that.
I don't know if there is the idea of giving charter schools property tax dollars that's in one of those bills that's referenced there. I think there is a bill out there. I don't know that it's going to get a hearing this year, but I think there's one in the Senate that talks about the idea of trying to share property tax dollars if it comes through a referendum with charter schools that would be in that county. So that idea is out there, but I don't think it's in a bill that's moving at this point.
All right. Do we have another question from our audience? Yes, right here in the middle.
Hi, my name is Tatiana, and I'm not from around here. I'm from Evansville. But I was just going to ask the question about addiction treatment services around here. There's been a lot of overdoses and just deaths around Evansville, and there's not been a lot of treatment or money going towards rehabilitation. So I was just wondering from around here if, if any money is going towards rehabilitation services, and maybe that would keep people from reoffending or going to jail. I was just wondering from each of you guys what your input is on that.
First of all, it's a long drive this morning from Evansville.
Well, I just came here
yeah, I'm just trying to tease. First of all, Yeah, that's a massive problem, and frankly, it has been, that addiction issue has been an issue for years, and I know well before the pandemic hit, if you look nationally, you could fill Lucas Oil Stadium with the people that died annually from overdose, and it hasn't gotten better in the last 2 years. In fact, we've just quit watching it, I think, over the last 2 years as we've been dealing with this pandemic, and so we circle back to that to take a close look. I don't think we'll be happy with what we found at all. There are a lot of changes that have happened over the years to try and get more services. And in fact, we had a conversation about taking these level 6 felons back to the Department of Corrections as opposed to the local governments. The reason that changed in the first place, which was about 2013 maybe or 14, was the idea that they could get better services in those local communities, also nearer their family and support mechanisms. And now there's an idea to shift that back to the Department of Corrections, and the Department of Corrections doesn't do a great job of treatment at all. And it's just hard to do, and it's extremely expensive. But dollars have been going into some community corrections all across the state with the idea that we'll be able to do that more and give more treatment. Additionally, mental health is a little bit different than addiction, but I think they're completely intertwined. In last year's budget, this is not a budget year, but in the budget that we finished in 2021, we put an additional $100 million for mental health treatment services that FSSA and the State Board of Health could use in order to get help out there for people who need it, with the idea that if you can get their mental health in order, then maybe they don't go down that road to addiction, or maybe they can pull themselves out of it. As you probably know, extremely difficult thing to fix, extremely important for us to fix it if we can. And so we've been adding resources to that for several years, but certainly it's not fixed yet.
Yeah, just a comment. I met with there in Terre Haute maybe about 5 weeks ago, Hamilton Center, and they serve, I don't know if it's 13 counties or 19 or whatever the number is, but as far as federal money, they've received $100 million from the feds, and $50 million for this year and another year. But so there's a lot of money that they have received on a federal side. But it's, again, another tough issue, mental health and addiction and so forth. I lost a son from suicide. But so it affects, again, there's no boundaries. It affects whether people here in Indiana or Midwest or in the nation. It's a tough subject. But there's been funding on the federal side pertaining to that, I know.
Do we have another question here in the in-person audience? Derek.
Senator Bray, your name came up on my news feed quite a bit yesterday with Senate Bill 167 in your statement on that. I appreciate that bill is not moving forward. From the administrator side of the provision providing that school corporations would be responsible for uploading all curriculum materials to their website, the administrative time and cost of that, I believe, would be quite prohibitive. We talked earlier about transparency in education. And the educators that I've spoken to have said, I have 2 degrees. I have a license from the state to be a teacher, and now I have folks wanting to micromanage and have my, I come up with a lesson plan the day before and I can't teach it because it had to be on the website, or sort of that administrative hurdle that creates. And I understand the need for transparency. And again, like I said about the school board issues, I think in the classroom, I don't know many teachers who would not welcome a parent to come and view all of their materials, to talk to them, to talk about their child. Teachers love their kids. Teachers have a lot of passion for their kids. And I don't know that Senate Bill 167 and House Bill 1134 that has similar language accomplishes what needs to happen to provide transparency in education. So I'm thankful that that bill is not moving forward, but I worry with the House bill still out there with the similar language. So.
You know, appreciate your comment. This is an issue that's tricky, and I have received passionate pleas in my district to do something about some of the things they feel like needs to be addressed. And again, it comes back to, as I said before, and as you said, transparency and engagement. That fixes nearly everything in our school business, because that involvement of the community helps us get it, helps the schools get it right. So that's what we want all the time. I think you're right. You know, as we look at, I don't think we have that language right yet. As we look at the obligation that we put on teachers, it's tricky, and it probably chills creativity and lots of other things going on in the school system, because if a teacher's on a Tuesday night and you see a neat program, or you run across a neat article when you're looking online and thinking about your class for the next day, and you think, no, I really like that, just fits perfectly into what we're trying to do. And then you think, yeah, but I got to upload that onto the before I do it, or at least 5 days after I've done it, and I'm just not going to do it. And that we don't want to do that to teachers. We don't want to do that to our kids and our educational system. So we're trying to figure that out. And 167 just simply isn't going to move. House bill, I think it's 1134, is being, they're working through that to try and address some of those similar issues. And we'll see. But we want to be cognizant of what we're doing to teachers and not put some onerous obligation on them that's going to kind of chill or cool their creativity. It's a point well made.
Anton, I'm going to turn the table just for a second and ask Derek a couple of questions, because I want to understand the transparency aspects. So currently, are school corporations, do they or are they required to put, for example, their curriculum information online? Any idea?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Not that there's a code, Indiana code about that.
Yeah.
But curriculum materials for, the state curriculum is accessible on the State
Sure,
Department of Ed website by anyone. So academic standards and that sort of thing. So to make sure your question is specific enough, are you talking about curricular materials that someone is teaching with?
That was
or
my
is
next
it
question.
academic standards?
Are your list of textbooks by chance put online anywhere? Any idea, or materials that you use, videos that are watched, or anything like that?
Not necessarily listed on the website, but that is a publicly accessible data through the corporation. I know that.
Thank you.
All right, well, it is 9 o'clock, and we're going to go ahead and wrap up this morning's event. We had a wonderful variety of questions, as everybody has seen and heard. And again, that's really what makes this the most valuable event, I think. That's why I love these events. I've been attending these since 2000 or whatever, and it's always cold, usually, or snowy. It's always good discussion, and it's always well attended. And that's something to say about Owen County and our citizens. We're very engaged. We care a lot about our community. And when there's any opportunity to engage, or whether it's to seek assistance or seek clarification or work with the state, we want to do that. I think that's a good thing, or a good partnership to have. Our next event here is going to be on February the 19th. Same place, same time. We'll have a different sponsor probably, but keep that on your calendar. We want to thank today's sponsor, the Bloomington Board of Realtors. And we appreciate our folks here at the facility with the Owen Valley Christian Fellowship. As you know, this is organized and put on by the Chamber of Commerce. They always do a wonderful job with this. And again, we thank all of you for showing up today and participating. Marcy, any closing comments that you would like to add in?
No, I was just going to remind everyone about February 19th.
Okay.
And if between now and then you need a reminder, you can always check out the go-owen.com to find out everything that's happening in Owen County, as well as you can just go to the myowencountychamber.com website for constant updates.
Daryl, you have your hand up. You know questions have expired. Okay.
Closing comment.
Sure.
Because there were several comments about transparency in a number of government bodies, and it's my personal experience and contention that there is transparency. It's just that people are looking the other way. So I think too many citizens ignore government until they think there's an issue that impacts them, and then they think that everybody's been conspiring against them for weeks, months, years, when really there's no conspiracy, there's no attempt to keep it quiet, it's just not being seen. And you know, the media is a part of that, because one of the questions was about all the time wasted on the permit to carry bill. Well, is it really that much time, or is it just get that much airtime on TV that makes it look like a much more contentious issue than it might be? But I just encourage everybody that might be listening to this, share with your friends. These are real people. They're not names, they're not just politicians, they're our neighbors. And this gives us an opportunity to sit down with them and have a conversation and share thoughts and ideas. So I just encourage more people, instead of complaining about a lack of transparency, get involved. Go to school board meetings, go to county council meetings. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, that's a good way to end it. And thank you, Darrell, for that. Thank you all for coming out. Be careful heading home.